What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central podcast. And today we got a lot to get into as the New York Mets getting back on track a bit, getting back on track with the offense as they just steamrolled the Nationals. We apologize for not putting up an episode after the last series against the Philadelphia Phillies. It's just that our schedules didn't align, so no podcast episode for that week. But we will continue, of course, going forward with the regularly scheduled programming. And we're probably just going to talk about the National Series. The Philly series is kind of irrelevant now, especially when the Mets just absolutely, I mean, they pissed all over the Nationals in this series. It wasn't even close, really, for a lot of it, outside of maybe the first game. But we're going to talk about everything, talk about the series that is coming up against the Phillies, since that's more important. Before we jump into everything, please be sure to leave a like on your way into the live stream. Don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're Mets fans. Turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live here on the channel. And how are we feeling after that 3-game set? And I think the answer is going to be the same as mine, which is a lot better than where we were just a couple days ago.
I mean, yeah, I'm excited, but look, now it's time to buckle down because we're here. We've arrived. The final gauntlet. These last 10 games. It's gonna be scary. It's gonna be exciting. It's gonna be hair pulling. I'm gonna be nervous as fuck, but this is what we wanted at the start of the season. Going into the year. Obviously after a poor off season. Well,
On paper.
retrospectively on paper when you looked at it. But we were saying 87 win team, 88 win team, 86 win team, and competing for the playoffs. And look, now after the sweep of the Nationals, this is an 84 win team. 10 more games left to go. 3 difficult series. Obviously, the final homestand here against the Phillies, 4-game set. Go to Atlanta, which has been a house of horrors for the Mets over the last couple of years. And you finish the season out by going to Milwaukee for a 3-game set. So, I mean, look, everything's in front of them right now. Everything's in front of them. And listen, right now, the pitching has been excellent, especially the starting pitching. I mean, this rotation has had the best ERA in September at like a 1.77. I mean, that's been just incredible. And it's like every single time a starter goes out there, it's like you're confident that they're going to go out there and give you innings, get guys out. I mean, shit, we're looking at guys like Tyler McGill, and he's been pitching well recently. Jose Quintana put in a really good outing yesterday. I mean, and then finally, it took a couple weeks, but finally the offense finally exploded. I mean, what they put up 22 runs in this series against the Nationals, and look, I get it, it's against the Nationals, but they came into a series against a poor Blue Jays team, and they were struggling to score runs in that series. So it is a good sign. But now you're heading against the Phillies. You're going to see guys like Nola. Actually, no, I don't think they're going to see Nola this series. Maybe they will. I have to look at the pitching matchups. But you're going to see Zach Wheeler. That's going to be a difficult matchup. You're going to see Suarez. And then you have a couple guys that you should tank off, like with tonight. You're playing Taijuan Walker. There are zero excuses to not go out there and just absolutely destroy him tonight. I mean, listen, like I said before, here we are. Now it's just time to buckle down.
Yeah, and they do avoid Nola in this series, which I don't know if they want to after the way they had his number in the last time they faced him. But regardless, we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, like you said, this is what we wanted going into these stretches of games here, where every pitch matters, and we're sitting on our couch every night or in the stadium, nervous at every single pitch that is being thrown, and hoping that the Mets end up finding their way in, because right now, control your own destiny. You are up 2 on the Braves. This is on nobody but yourselves. There's no way to blame around you. You can't blame teams for not helping you at this point, because at this point, if you don't make the playoffs, that's on you. You are up in the count, and you have to control your own destiny here. And everything's right in front of them, like you mentioned. It's crazy because I remember, it feels like yesterday we were sitting here talking about the Milwaukee series where they got swept. And it feels like just yesterday we were at opening day. It's crazy that we're just here right now talking about a pennant race already. But here we are, and this is important. And I agree with you, because we'll segue into the National Series here heavily and talk about it. I agree with you that you can't minimize what they did this series, because how many times have the Mets in previous series face just terrible, and I mean terrible teams, and they don't take advantage of it, or they're laboring for runs, scraping out these wins and we're biting our nails. It was nice for once to be able to watch them play a terrible team, and we just sit back, feet up on the couch, because we know the game is over with the lead that they have. It wasn't just so much more enjoyable to watch those games versus what we've watched them do against teams like the Marlins all season long, where they're struggling, or like you mentioned, the Blue Jays. Isn't it nice for a change where, the Mets just steamroll them? Because to me, I enjoyed it, and you just can't minimize what they did. But with that being said, like you mentioned, and like I mentioned in my post game, now this has to carry over, because if you struggle again offensively in the series against the Phillies, and I get their pitching staff is better, but if you're laboring for runs like you were before, then it doesn't matter. Then all of this really does not matter, because you're going to put yourself behind the 8 ball again if you start dropping games. In my mind, they have to take at least 3 out of 4 against the Phillies, and I know that's a lot to ask for, especially considering how good this team is that they're facing, and the Phillies are fighting to keep their to one, clinch the division, which they could do at Citi Field, which I hope that gives the Mets motivation to go out there and win, even more so. And on top of that, they are fighting to not have to play in the wild card series, because there really isn't that big of a gap between them, the Brewers, and the Dodgers. Like, any of those teams honestly could have to play in the wild card series, so they are still fighting for wins. Like, these games are meaningful, at least for the Phillies a bit, but this also could be a test to show the world we're here. If the Mets make a statement here this series against the Phillies and say, we're here, and if we see you in October, we're going to be a problem for you. To me, that's what's most important. Like, this, I would say, is just as important as the Brave series, just because of the optics of the fact that the Mets have a chance to make a statement to the rest of the league, not just the Phillies, but the rest of the league, that we're here. We could compete with these quality teams. So, like you mentioned, it is a gauntlet, but if you want to prove you're the best, you got to beat the best. And this is the time to step on their throats. You don't have Lindor for at least the first game, it looks like. I don't know if that's going to change day to day based on the results of each game, because if they win, maybe they're just going to, again, keep it cautious with Lindor and just let him sit. That's what I think they're doing right now with him anyway, and just trying to be cautious and not rush him back into the lineup, which I have no problem with that approach, because if it was the opposite where they were rushing him back in, we'd all be losing our mind. So I have no problem with that. But again, obviously I want to know your thoughts on all that, even though you probably agree.
So I kind of say right now, like, if I was just sitting here and like you gave me an option, I would take a split right now against the Phillies, because when you look at it, it's 10 games left to go. Realistically, like 6-4 should be enough to get them in. Because if 90 wins doesn't get you into the playoffs this year, then at that point it's like, yeah, I give up at that point, because that just be insane considering how last year it only took 84 wins to get into the playoffs. But I mean, listen, you split with the Phillies, right? Then you go to Atlanta, you take 2 out of 3, and you go to Milwaukee and you try to take 2 out of 3 there, and that gets you to 90 wins. And I mean, look, none of these series are exactly going to be easy. I mean, they're all going to be difficult. Like, even if you want to look at the Brewers series and you say like, oh, but they already clinched the division, so they're not going to be going that intense. Well, no, not necessarily, because like you said, they're fighting to avoid the wild card series, and which is that for me is just dumb. The fact that you can win your division and still have to compete in the wild card series. This is why realignment has to be done in Major League Baseball, because that just doesn't make any sense. But I mean, yeah, like it's kind of crazy for me, because I'm looking at it right now. Like, I'm more confident heading into this Philly series than I probably would be going into the Atlanta series, and that's just because of the recent history. And listen, I get probably the Phillies are, well, not that I get, the Phillies are a better team on paper right now than the Atlanta Braves, but just because, like I mentioned before, the recent history, they still got plenty of guys in that Atlanta lineup, like Austin Riley, Michael Harris, Travis Darnell, that just, they always kill the Mets for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, listen, right now I would take a split, and this is why, like, because I'm sure we're going to talk about when the Lindor injury first happened, I know there was a lot of panic throughout the whole fan base, and I get it, because Lindor's the MVP of the team, and he should be the MVP of the National League. But the reason why I wasn't really too like frustrated or concerned is because I'm like, listen, injuries happen in baseball, and I get it, it sucks. But you know what? There's been plenty of guys on this roster that have underperformed throughout the whole year. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, if I'm a guy in that locker room, like a Pete Alonso, like a Brandon Nimmo, like a JD Martinez, like a Francisco Alvarez, if I'm in that locker room and I see Francisco Lindor go down, I'm kind of looking at it and I was like, yo, this is my opportunity to step up. Like Lindor has carried this team throughout the whole second half and majority of the year. Now it's time for me to, you know, to pay back that favor. And at the end of the day, maybe we look back at this season in retrospective and say, listen, Lindor carried this team throughout the whole second half, like I mentioned, but at the end of the day, Pete Alonso stepped up at the last couple series of the year, and he pushed this team into the playoffs and potentially a deep run in the playoffs. So it's big, and we saw Pete have a relatively good series against the Washington Nationals. But like we said before, with this whole lineup in general, now that has to push over into Philadelphia because cool, you beat up on the poor Washington Nationals team. I get that, but now step up.
I love the point that you brought up with the next man up mentality, and this applies to this with Acuna, which we'll talk a lot about him, of course, but next man up mentality, and I wonder if that's something along the lines of what Pete Alonso said in that room, because we talked at nauseum leading up to the last podcast episode that Pete is playing his way out of New York versus playing his way to stay here. If all of a sudden that team meeting that they had, that apparently he really drove the bus for and really drove the bus in terms of being the most vocal during that meeting, if that is what catapults them into the postseason and more importantly on a deep run, and Pete Alonso goes on a huge stretch of games like you mentioned because it's got to carry over, all of a sudden it does not matter what he did the first however many months of the season. All of a sudden that changes the entire conversation of wanting him extended, because that shows maturity in Pete Alonso that I think is that we've been looking for a very long time. Because how many times have we talked about too? Pete Alonso isn't a real leader. Pete Alonso is just kind of like a goofy guy, this and that. To me, that shows maturity in a guy, and it shows me a guy that could handle pressure if he gets this done and catapults them into the postseason by driving this offense and driving the locker room, keeping the morale up, because something was clearly said from him that got this team going, because all of a sudden everyone just remembered how to hit again. And again, like you said, it's got to carry over, but there are a lot of signs that say this will carry over because you're seeing them pull the ball more. And I know Pete Alonso ironically had a lot of bloop hits and stuff, but they ended up being clutch. But there is stuff that is sustainable here with pulling the ball and all that other stuff. Like, this looks like what we saw in July when we were talking about them potentially being a threat to grab the division, and then unfortunately they trolled this past weekend in Philly, and because otherwise it would be a 3-game separation right now and this series could be deciding the division, but fortunately it's not the case. But it doesn't matter at this point. Get in, and if this is what turns it around, then Pete Alonso might have earned himself an extension.
And this is why I really like the idea of the team meeting. And it wasn't only Pete. It was Mendoza and it was actually Stearns that actually, wanted to do this meeting. And I think and I know a lot of people were speculating and maybe saying that the reason was that, Lindor might be out for longer than we anticipated. So maybe it was one of those, like, breaking the bad news. I mean, look, that could be the case. I don't know for certain because I'm not in the clubhouse. I'm not in that locker room. But I think part of it was because, like I mentioned before, that they went down there and said, like, listen, guys, I get it. It sucks to lose a guy like Lindor, but at the end of the day, this is a very talented roster, and it has a bunch of guys on this roster and this lineup that has been underperforming for a while. So now it's one of your guys' turn to step up and be the real hero to try to propel this team into a playoff spot. So I really love that team meeting, and seeing that Pete was really one of the key contributors in that meeting and speaking up the most. I mean, that's a really good sign.
Yeah. And clearly it's sending the right message to not just the players that have been here, but let's talk about Acuna right now because there's just nothing but good things to say for a kid that's called up right now, that has been called up and just thrown in the middle of a pennant race and is filling in the shoes of a guy that we were talking about winning the MVP, and him looking as calm and composed as he does and hitting the way he is. Holy crap. Because all this time, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I was ecstatic about Acuna and think, yeah, this kid is, the real deal and everything and one of the top prospects. I always thought he was just labeled a top prospect because of the last name, and the numbers in AAA didn't look good. And I was worried, but I always said it, and you and I both said it. We would rather see Acuna here than DJ Stewart. And we had people telling us nonstop, oh, it's stupid. Look at Acuna's numbers. He needs more time in AAA. But then there was us who were saying, you can't. Wait, is 1 or 2 weeks going to hurt for his development? Because I'll tell you right now, if anything, he's bolstering his development because he looks so good right now for a team that's in the middle of a pennant race, and he's driving this offense a bit at times too. And it's just insane seeing this from a kid who was first called up, from a kid who really has some pressure to him because of, like I said, the shoes that he's filling and because of the last name. And he just looks better than I thought. The bat speed, way better than I thought. His defense looks unbelievable. I mean, there's just not one bad thing to say about Acuna right now. Obviously, again, just like the rest of the team, we have to see it carry over. But if this carries over, he's playing himself his way onto the postseason roster because, and I'm saying that because if he's thriving and the Mets keep winning, they're making the postseason at that point. He's playing himself onto that roster.
Oh, one that's not even a debate. I mean, listen, I'd much rather him over Eddie Alvarez. And listen, this is like what we were saying. Like, if you were gonna call up, and it still boggles my mind that we even entertained the idea of bringing up DJ Stewart up to the majors because it made no sense. Because I'm the type of person that says like, look, if you're gonna call somebody up, like they either have to be very talented with the bat, good in the field, or has speed and can run the bases. DJ Stewart offers none of that. He's slow. He can play the outfield, but let's be honest, it's not a very good outfield, and he can't hit the major league level. Well, Acuna's come up here. He's shown that he's able to run the bases well. He's able to, to field the ball well. I know he had that one little mistake between him and Vientos. I think for me, when I looked at it, I think it was kind of on both of them. Like, yes, the Vientos throw was low, but I still think he should have caught the ball. But listen, and even with that one, right? Like he made that error in the infield, and then the next at bat he came up after Harrison Bader drew the walk, and he drove in Harrison Bader to tie the game at 1-1. So right away, I'm like, this guy doesn't get flustered easily, which is a very good sign for a young kid that first came up. And I mean, listen, his bat's just been incredible. And listen, I get it's a small sample size, right? But in 5 games, a 467 average, 467 on base, 933 slugging, over I think a 1500 OPS with a 292 WRC plus. I mean, he's been insane, and he's been just a breath of fresh air. And then I mean, because I got to speak on another guy too, right? Because and I got to apologize to this guy. Not that because I was doubting his game, but because I was kind of, hesitant to see him in a full-time role. But Jose Iglesias, this guy has been special. I mean, listen, we talk about like next man up mentality, right? I mean, the Mets starting infield of Francisco Lindor and Jeff McNeil goes down. And then Luisangel Acuna and Jose Iglesias just come up here and say, like, listen, we got this. No need to worry. I mean, Iglesias in the sample size that he's been a starter since McNeil has went down with an injury. 405 batting average, 444 on base, 452 slugging for an OPS of I think 968 I think 968 somewhere around there, and a 161 WRC plus. Jose Iglesias has just been he's been incredible. I mean, like, listen, we talk about like Lindor being the MVP of the team. Jose Iglesias is like the next man up MVP for this team because he's come up here and he's just changed the whole dynamic of this team. I mean, from the clubhouse chemistry to his on the field stuff, because I mean, like I said before, even like with his hitting, his defense is just incredible. And I know I've said this many times, but some of the plays this guy makes is just like it's crazy.
Yeah, he is another guy who had an unbelievable series, and him and Acuna definitely build on each other because of the fact that, like you said, you have your two starting infielders, middle infielders nonetheless, go down, and it's like these two guys just are playing every day now and are filling in the roles. And Iglesias is filling in a big role himself too, because I know Acuna is filling in the spot for Lindor in terms of position wise, but Iglesias is filling in the spot of being the leadoff hitter, and he's setting the table for this offense night in and night out. And there's been times I've laughed when he was hitting second and I didn't love it, but if he's gonna keep playing this way, he's gotta just be hitting second every day. And now it just like really also brings an interesting question, and it's a great problem to have if the lineup continues to be this way. How do you configure it? Because right now, when Lindor comes back, that is, because right now you have so many guys on a heater, and you still have Winker on the bench. JD Martinez didn't play yesterday, and he's been in a slump, so there's an argument there for him to not play as much. Tyrone Taylor is heating up. Marte is turning back the clock right now at the right time. Um, it brings an interesting question of what you do with this lineup, and all of a sudden, it's a great problem to have, because we were having the ass opposite problem just days ago, where we were like, somebody's got to thrive. Somebody's got to step up. And then even Brandon Nimmo yesterday, that home run from him finally pulled a ball that wasn't foul. If he gets going all of a sudden, and the way that he talked in that post-game interview, I've never wanted to run through a wall more for someone until Brandon Nimmo spoke. And it's making me seriously consider going to the game tonight by myself, because he had me fired up with the way that he was talking in that post-game interview. I mean, you're just getting the contributions from everyone. Like I said, a few days ago, none of the outfielders were hitting. Now all of a sudden, they're all hitting, outside of maybe Bader, but you're still getting his valuable defense out there. Alvarez, we had questions about him, and we were saying maybe even Torrent should be catching more. No. Alvarez all of a sudden is pulling the ball and not listening to Eric Chavez. Mark Vientos, maybe he's starting to find his way out of this skid that he's in a bit with a 2-hit game yesterday. Obviously, we have to see more because he went 0 for 4 in the previous 2, but maybe he could find his way out. JD Martinez, you got to hope that if he starts to sit a bit, he could find a way out. Winker, when he's in the lineup, hopefully could find his way out of his skid that he's been in for a bit. The pieces are falling into place though right now. And all I know is that this doesn't just get you into the postseason. This is what gets you to win in the postseason, if this is what we're going to get. And again, I'm trying so hard not to get too ahead of myself, because it is one series, and we've seen times where after a series, things just change. And I don't expect the offense to put up a 10 spot every game from here on out, especially against better teams like the Phillies. But, putting up 5 runs or 4 or 5 runs with the way that this pitching is, that should be enough to win you games. And not just, again, to get you to the playoffs, but in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, you're loving all the contributions throughout the whole lineup, and that was the recipe for why this offense was so lethal in July, is because everybody was just picking guys up one after another. But listen, I mean, the outfield right now in terms of the offense has been really good, especially Tyrone Taylor, because this is a guy that just he stepped up big, and not only is he doing it with the bat, but he's also doing it with the glove. And I mean, he was one of the only guys that really had a very good offensive series in Philadelphia, especially the last 2 games. Because obviously he was the only one who hit the home run in the final game of that series. But I mean, listen, you're also getting it from Marte, and Marte pissed me off the first game before he had that walk off, because he had that at bat where he came up in the 8th inning. You had Taylor at third base, and new pitcher comes in, swings first pitch, grounds out like what a typical Starling Marte at bat would be from the last couple weeks. But he recovered from that. He got the count in his favor in extra innings to 3-1, ripped the ball hard into left field, walked up the game, and then he's just been contributing throughout the last 2 games of that series as well. And then Francisco Alvarez is just, he's really starting to turn the corner, and I'm just really loving it, because I was one of the guys that was just sitting here, and I'm like, and sitting here hoping that Alvarez turns it around, because I'm like, because I was getting the I understood the conversations about starting Luis Torrens because at that time Luis Torrens was not only was he swinging the bat well, but he was also giving you very good defense. But the one of the reasons why I was always sticking with Alvarez and why I just wanted to proceed with him was because I know that if he gets it right, that's the result that could happen. That power. And they need that type of power from him, especially, not only for these last three series, but potentially if you want a deep playoff run, you're going to need that power because, like we said time and time again, in the playoffs, the long ball wins you games. So listen, if he's going to continue it, I'm just going to be sitting back and smiling because this is the type of Francisco Alvarez that we need.
Yeah. And while you give yourself a pat on the back with Alvarez, I'm going to give myself a pat on the back with Tyrone Taylor because I was saying give this guy consistent playing time. He's a guy that I feel like needs more playing time to at least play a solid game. And is this going to hold up? I don't know because quite frankly, at the end of the day, he's been on the bench for the most part of the season for a reason. But I was like, give this guy a chance and let him get hot because if you're not going to get it from any of these other outfielders, you got to just play guys that are not playing right now and see if you could find something. And Tyrone Taylor has been better. And like you said with Alvarez, give yourself that pat on the back, man, because he's been playing so much better. And again, if this is the Alvarez they're going to get going forward, that's going to change things drastically. And we talked about it ad nauseum that just one guy, even just one guy getting hot in this offense could change the dynamic. And hitting's contagious. We've heard that saying time and time again. I think you're seeing a case of hitting that is contagious right now because, they're seeing Acuna and Iglesias get going and then Alonso even too. All of a sudden, the rest of the offense is hitting and it just is changing everything. So I'm loving what I'm seeing from the offense. And we're not even done gassing up this team because Jose Quintana pitched a great game. Because Tyler McGill is looking better than Paul Blackburn did before Paul Blackburn got hurt. Sean Manaea making a case right now to where he's not going to be a finalist for the Cy Young. I'm not saying that. But I think he sneaks his way onto the ballot with a vote or two with the way that he's pitching. Like, the baseline numbers are in the Cy Young conversation at this point. Sucks that he didn't get the win in that first game because the offense didn't show up until late. But since the Boomer writers care mostly about wins, unfortunately. But Sean Manaea continuing his dominance. Jose Budo in that first game looked like himself again. Diaz looked a bit shaky, but he's also a guy that didn't get a lot of work, which is a little unfortunate. Brazoban, even though, has looked good the past two games. Is it the Nunez glove? I don't know, but he's looked better. The pitching right now, the pitching has been, especially the starting pitching, and I love the celebration they have in the dugout after outings too. This team is just vibes. Like, imagine Buck Showalter managing this team. He'd freaking pull whatever is left of his hair out and scream his head off at how these guys are having too much fun. But I love it right now. This team is vibes, and it people are saying it on Twitter all the time, and I couldn't agree more, not just as a fan, but just as someone that watches baseball itself. This is the most fun baseball team I've seen in my damn life, and it's starting with the starting pitchers right now. And it's been since what, like August, September? And remember, this was our biggest worry before the season, but we just know that a certain somebody brought that cheating lab over to Queens, and now you're seeing it. You're seeing a pitching staff that is really holding its own. It took a bit, but they're holding their own.
The man in the seats has done wonder for this organization. I mean, it's even got to a point where we got WFAN freaking having debates on the air about are the Mets cheating or are they taking steroids? No, it's just the cheating lab. It's just when you have smart people in the front office instead of a certain other team we cheer for. But when you have smart people in the front office, good things tend to happen. And listen, right now we've got one of the best president of baseball operations in the MLB, and I'm very happy that he grew up a Met fan, and I'm very happy that that he wants to make this team successful. But even with guys like McGill, right? I mean, I remember when he first got called up to replace Blackburn and he came into that White Sox series. I mean, I remember we weren't even confident about him going into that White Sox game. We're like, is this guy even going to survive 3 innings? And he had a decent outing against the White Sox. The Red Sox game, he was a bit shaky, but then you really start to see a turn of fortunes in that Blue Jays game. Really start to see the fastball improve, and he was getting a lot of swings and misses in that game. And he had a solid 6 innings. And then the last game, like fastball was still good, but he wasn't getting the majority of his outs on strikeouts. It was more just a lot of soft contact, light ground balls, um, fly balls into the outfield. And I'm liking the fact that he can really change up his game a little bit and change his game plan in terms of going to majority of outs from the strikeouts to going to the majority of outs in terms of ground balls and fly balls. But McGill's just been he's been really good. I mean, he's putting up a strong case right now for if Blackburn eventually returns, he's putting up a strong case right now to keep his spot. And I never thought I would say that in this season at all.
Yeah, and you're at a point right now where you just need I think they have like what, one or two more turns maybe each in the rotation. You're at a point right now where you just need Tyler McGill and Jose Quintana, who we both ripped on time and time again this season. If you could get these two to just give you one more good outing each, then success. Success. You got a lot out of these guys down the stretch here. Obviously, these guys might make the postseason roster if they're going to continue to pitch like this. But I really am curious what happens with Quintana now, because the whole thing with Senga potentially coming back and how he was going to piggyback Senga's starts. I wonder if that conversation changes a bit. I don't know, but it's just interesting to see. And you also have Senga, who said he's not going to come back unless he's 1,000% healthy, which I like a lot, that he wants to actually be healthy and not hurt the team. I appreciate someone on my team doing that for once instead of trying to play hero ball. Totally not taking shots at a certain someone right now who's already pissed me off enough today, but we're not going to talk about that. But yeah, I'm very curious if Senga does come back, how they're going to approach this, because, the starting pitching has just been unreal, where it's like, you got to be at least a little scared to mess with this in some regard, because if Quintana's going to pitch like this, I worry about messing up his routine of starting, because maybe coming out of the bullpen will hurt him after like an inning or two from Senga. Even the same goes for McGill. I don't know, but all I know is that I want your thoughts. Just like, what do you think about that whole situation with Senga?
I mean, it's a good problem to have right now, right? I mean, how many times through the years have we watched, the Mets, whichever year it was, and we're desperately clamming for someone to just come up and give good outings, and now it's like we can pick between 6, 7 guys. It's like, okay, like even though by name wise maybe you're not the guy we trust the most, but through results you're pitching well. And it's like, I mean, this is not like the 2017 Mets where we're relying on guys like Rafael Montero and Robert Zellman to give outings. I mean, it's a very good problem to have, and I like that approach from Senga, where if I'm not 100% healthy, I'm not going to go out there and pitch, because not only for his sake, because the Mets still have him under contract for 3 more years. So why damage him when he's still under contract for 3 more years? And considering that this team is going to be competing for a World Series the next couple of years, there's no reason to try to go out there and damage him further. And I like that approach from him, because it's like, I don't want to hurt the team in any way unless I know 100% I'm fully ready to go. But like I said, I mean, this is a good problem to have. I mean, potentially you go into a wild card series, picking between Manaya, Severino, you know, McGill, Quintana, and any of these guys. You can say it's like, okay, like, listen, I trust you. Go out there and let's see what happens.
I really wonder, and I really don't want to get ahead of myself because I shouldn't with this team going beyond the wild card, but I can't help but wonder how they're going to handle this, because typically a team will pick 3 to 4 guys for the rotation in the postseason. Right now, I just really wonder how you even pick between these guys, because right now you're just getting the contributions from everyone. And I know that I've called Peterson a fraud and everything, but you're still at least getting good starts on paper from him. And it just really brings an interesting conversation where if they go beyond, it's just like, how do you pick between these four? I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. But you also have the other side of it where, okay, yeah, some of these guys might move to the bullpen, but how do you decide who's coming out of the bullpen then? Because we know they love Ottavino so much. Brazaban, if he's going to pitch better down the stretch here, that could change the conversation there. I don't know. It's just an interesting dynamic. I shouldn't talk about it. I shouldn't get too ahead of myself and think about that until we're in a spot where that could be a legit conversation. But it is interesting, of course, to think about. But yeah, the pitching has just been unbelievable. Pitching has been unbelievable. The lineup's been unbelievable. And let's hope that this carries here down the gauntlet because, like I said, if you prove that you could beat these teams, then you're proving that you could be one of the best teams in the National League and compete with anyone. And right now, they go against some pretty good starters in Philly. So this is again going to be a huge test. They got to face the first game Taiwan Walker, who they just should annihilate tonight. Christopher Sanchez in the second game, who owned them last time. Ranger Suarez has had a solid season, but he's been kind of shaky lately. And then Zach Wheeler, which always scares me. But yeah, if this lineup could just continue to perform, then and they could prove against these starters that they're still able to hit, that makes me feel very confident going into October.
No, yeah, I mean, look, if I mean, like you mentioned before, if we're gonna talk about potentially lining up a rotation for the wild card series, I mean, I think for me, I think it's obvious. I think you got to go game one for Manaya. He has to open up game one, and then really game two, game three depends how you want to line up because I think it's probably either between Severino and Peterson. So it just depends whoever you feel comfortable pitching in game two or a game three. But I mean, and listen, the one good sign that they have right now is they've lined up the pitching rotation right now for the best three starters to go into Atlanta. And I know that we did that in 2022, and it didn't work out all too well with Jake, Max, and Bassett. But listen, it's a new team. You're not facing exactly the same Atlanta Braves, and right now, I mean, listen, I think it's a strong argument right now to say that this the pitcher rotation in 2024 is a whole of a lot better than the pitcher rotation in 2022. And I know 2022 had the names like Max, like DeGrom, but in terms of production and outing wise, I think the starting rotation clears it by a mile.
Oh yeah, 100% because it has the depth as well to it. Like that year, beyond like after once you got the Taiwan Walker, which even then second half Walker, we know how he was. It was really DeGrom, Scherzer, Bassett, and then after those three, you had a mixed bag of guys that really weren't performing. Like Carrasco is up and down that year. Walker, like I said, in the second half wasn't great, and then Peterson and McGill were what they were that year. So you really didn't have anything to work with starting pitching wise this year. Like I said, you have the depth, and it's only going to get better if Senga comes back. So it's a great problem to have. It's really great, and it's crazy that we're sitting here able to talk about this team potentially being better than that team because I mean, not that I was really ever high on that team despite them winning 101 games, but still, it's just crazy after the 0-5 start how far we've come. It just will always be in the back of my mind. But yeah, I don't know really if I have much else to add. My voice is kind of shot too from yelling about another team that will not be named right now earlier. But do you have any other thoughts about this team right now before we talk about other topics here and then wrap it up?
No, I mean, listen, like I said at the start, it's the gauntlet now. Final 10 games, bulk down and just be ready to go because every pitch, every out, every inning, every game matters until that final out is recorded in Milwaukee. And maybe we'll know before then, or maybe the final game of the season will determine if this team is in the playoff spot. But all I know is you got to approach every game like it's a must-win game right now, and that's the mentality that I want established from David Stearns down to Carlos Mendoza, down to the guys on the team, even down to the guys as the bullpen coaches and the bullpen catchers, even the janitors at City Field. That's the mentality I want. Every single win matters from here until further notice.
Yeah. Um. So with that being said, the last conversations that we'll have here, just a little bit of an update, of course, on certain injuries. Christian Scott shut down for the year, shut down for next year, potentially even, as he is going to have Tommy John surgery. So unfortunately, when we talked about the starting pitching having a lot of depth, fortunately they took a hit to that depth with a injury to Christian Scott. Pretty much what we all expected, honestly, with the Tommy John being needed with an elbow injury. I wish they just did this a bit earlier. And I know I get the argument that he probably would have missed next season regardless, but you never know. Maybe if he did, he was already 2 months in the rehab. Maybe there's a chance late next season he'd be able to come back. But I guess it's not the worst thing if he's just shut down all of next year as well, and you just let him recover, let him come back in 2026. That will change conversations in the offseason about potentially bringing back Severino and Manaya. So that's a conversation to be had at some point, but we won't do that. I think we brought up last episode that Dedno Nunez will not be returning this season. I don't remember if that was mentioned, but
I think so.
if
Yeah.
not, Nunez is done for the season, and that also hurt. And in terms of others, Paul Blackburn had fluid removed from his back, which is just interesting to say the least, but he's going to start throwing again soon. He's feeling better, which I don't know what they envision his role being at this rate, but that's neither here nor there. It looks like he's going to be coming back at some point. Kodai Senga we mentioned, and then Jeff McNeil. All we got on an update from him is that if they're rolling into October deep, then there's a chance he returns. So we'll see what happens there. Other than that, really not a whole lot of other news, because there's really not much news-wise to talk about as we're in the middle of a pennant race. We just have to wait and see how the chips fall in these last 10 games, and we'll see what the Mets' fate is. But it starts tonight. If anyone is watching this before the game, I encourage you, if you are able to this weekend, go to Citi Field, like Nemo did. Go to Citi Field. It's the last homestand of the regular season. Bring the energy. Make it feel like a playoff game at the stadium for the next few days. And hopefully we'll get to come back in October, the next time the Mets play, and we're waving orange playoff towels, going absolutely insane, standing for every single pitch of the game. I just gave myself chills thinking about it.
No, yeah, I mean, just to touch on the Scott point, I had a feeling that this was ultimately going to be the conclusion, that he was ultimately eventually going to get Tommy John surgery. I would have liked him to do it as soon as he went on the IL in July, because for me, right, like, this wasn't the first time he had problems with his elbow. Now, like I was saying kind of before, like, if this was the first time he had elbow problems and it was hurting a little bit, then I kind of get, waiting and pushing it back further to see, because it's his first time. But considering the fact that, this was like his second, third time already with elbow issues, I'm like, you know what, just cut it loose early and just get the Tommy John surgery already, because I didn't see any point to push it back, because we were hearing like, oh, Scott's gonna throw off a mound here, he's playing catch in the outfield, and it really never materialized into anything. And he's gonna be out for the rest of this year. He's gonna be out for the rest of next year. Look, we don't know if he had it earlier, he would have, come back next year at the end, but you never know, because look, it could have been like something similar to what we saw with DeGrom, where, he got the surgery in like June, July, around there, and now he's back for the Rangers for the end of the season. He obviously pitched, I think, last week. So, and listen, I get it, the games really don't matter now for the Rangers because they're not making the playoffs, but still, Scott for next year, he could have been a key guy to come back later in the season, maybe, propel the Mets, to maybe a division winning season next year. So yeah, I mean, look, it sucks for him. Hopefully just a speedy recovery from him. Hopefully, we see him back in this rotation for the 2026 season. But I mean, yeah, like what Brandon Emo said, guys, get out there to City Field, support the team, because four more home games left, and the guys on that field, they need all the support they can get. Just go out there, yell, scream, be loud, and just enjoy the final four games. Because and listen, hopefully we're back here. Maybe if they somehow catch the Padres and host wild card games at City Field, but if they don't, hopefully they progress to the wild card, and then we'll see. Maybe we'll be there for Game 3 of the NLDS.
100%. And it's just crazy how they are going to have to play potentially that many consecutive road games, which that's going to be a challenge in itself for this group. So I'm interested to see how they handle all that. And if they could overcome all that and get themselves back to City Field for the divisional series after fighting all this adversity, I mean, that's a huge sign, at least going forward with this group, even if they don't end up getting the job done. But we will see what happens. Thank you guys so much, though, for tuning in and watching this episode. Don't forget to leave a like if you haven't already. Don't forget to subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live. And we'll see you guys in the next one.